Lots of people are talking today about Donald Trump potentially suing the BBC for £1 billion. Quite frankly, I hope he does, and I hope he wins. What Panorama did really is unforgivable. Essentially, they did the thing that America was accusing Russia of, which is running election interference and trying to influence the election, from a foreign power. They basically took two bits of footage, which happened hours apart from each other, and they doctored it. They put it together to make Donald Trump look like he was calling for violence.
January 6th.
He might have said some things which riled up the crowd, but what the BBC showed was a blatant lie. They were pushing a sort of narrative to millions of people that never actually happened, all to discredit Donald Trump and to try to change the outcome of election, quite frankly. And I think this is absolutely outrageous, and it's unforgivable, to be fair. It's not like it was even a little thing, like they edited Donald Trump to make the footage better. They fundamentally changed the message on something which really, really matters. Something which would have had an impact on how people voted. The Labour Party in the United Kingdom went out and they campaigned for Kamala Harris, and they've supported Hillary. And, there's a sort of clear bias in the political class in the UK and the media class against Republicans, and they've had this forever, basically. They are incredibly snooty, quite frankly. They think they're better than everybody else. They look down on the working class in the UK, and they probably look down on anybody who didn't go to Oxford and Cambridge, because overwhelmingly, the BBC employs people who went to those two universities, and they employ a few other people probably, but when the BBC talk about diversity, they're talking about people who went to Oxford and Cambridge who aren't white, basically. That's their idea of diversity, which isn't particularly diverse because you're excluding nearly everybody from the country from being at the BBC. So no wonder they develop groupthink. No wonder they think that they are correct and that everybody else is wrong, because they're all from the same background. They've all been taught the same stuff. They look at America and they think, oh my God, they have guns. And we can't believe they would do such a thing. They don't understand the culture. And the fact that they were trying to interfere with the election in the United States is absolutely outrageous, in my opinion. And nevertheless, the BBC downplay it. They even said on the radio earlier that Donald Trump flip-flops all the time and that he's not a serious person and that he'll sort of give in tomorrow. He won't even remember what happened today, right? It'll completely slip his mind tomorrow. Even now, they are kind of describing him as stupid, and they've done this forever. They did this to George Bush, they liked Obama, and they like the Democrats, but they don't like anybody who is Republican. So there is a clear bias at the BBC for multiple things, but certainly on America, they would much, much, much rather Kamala Harris had won. Somebody called Nandy in our government, who's fairly senior apparently, basically said, don't sag off the BBC. Don't, go after the BBC saying that it shouldn't, do whatever it wants. It shouldn't lie about, the president of a foreign country. The BBC is wonderful and we need to protect the lovely BBC. No, I don't like the BBC because of how it's funded, right? I don't particularly like the programming either, but that doesn't really matter. But look, this is what I hate, right? When people in the UK say we don't like the BBC and how it's funded, a widower, right, 89 years old, was sent 53 threatening letters over the TV license fee, right? So if you don't know, in the UK, we all have to pay a TV license if you want to have live TV in your house, which, a lot of people will say they don't have any live TV, but this, even includes streaming over the internet. So this is basically just a sort of mafia tax, interesting word, mafia, a sort of mafia tax on everybody to sort of fund their horrendous bias. And again, I'm going to go into the bias and I'm going to go over some of what they actually believe, because I think that's quite pertinent. But firstly, I thought I would look at Panorama. Trump and the tech titans. Panorama investigates PayPal mafia and their influence on Trump's rise to president. Really? And when they talk about the PayPal mafia, they're talking about Elon Musk, right? I've watched a bit of this, and they show Elon Musk as being an evil, evil man. Look at the picture, describing one of the richest man in the world as mafia, really? Gaza, dying for food. Already they're saying that, they don't have enough food and they're dying in Gaza without even sort of bothering to present any evidence. When you watch any of this, they will frame it as the West and Israel and America are the bad guys, and, the Gazans didn't do anything wrong ever. They're the good guys, and, it's the wicked aggressors who are clearly us who are sort of attacking them. And again, whether, whatever you think about the story, this is their narrative that they're pushing. Trump and Starmer, a special relationship? Question mark. What is the state of the historic special relationship between the US and the UK? They have Keir Starmer, right? Very uncomfortable. He's got his arm across his chest, but he's sort of shaking hands at a distance. Donald Trump has kind of got a powerful open posture. Oh, why I joined a riot. So again, this is more bias. Basically, in Southport in the UK, 3 little girls were murdered by a third-generation migrant to the UK, and this happened in Wales. There was a lot of questions we wanted answered. The government knew about this guy. They didn't actually act. They were grossly incompetent. They couldn't even spell his name right. So people were rightly angry and outraged, and they went out and they protested. But again, Panorama is framing this as a riot. Trump, Israel, and the war on Iran. It sounds like Trump and Israel are attacking Iran here. And, I watched some of this, and I don't think I've got the footage up. But again, it's very, very sympathetic to Iran. But yeah, the sympathy is on Iran. Poor Iran. Why was it attacked? It didn't do anything wrong. Here, they talk about the Southport attack. So they hadn't upgraded it to a riot yet. But it was an attack here. It wasn't a murder or anything. It wasn't a mass murder. It was just an attack. Panorama is a sort of propaganda program, basically. When a news organization fabricates or distorts evidence to support a preferred narrative, it engages in confirmation bias-driven agenda setting. What does this mean? Confirmation bias means they're going to basically expand what you already believe by constantly giving you more and more and more evidence to support a certain worldview. And again, the theory is they can change what somebody believes over the years by, continuously feeding them little bits of news stories. For example, you looked at Panorama there, they'll just feed you little stories constantly that change the way you think. At least that's the theory. A phenomenon explored in media theory under the concept of framing, which is basically what direction you want the story to go. Do you want the story to say Israel is the victim here? Or do you want the story to say Palestine is the victim, or Iran is the victim? Or, I suppose more pertinent to this, you want to say Donald Trump is the bad guy because look at him calling for a sort of riot, which never actually happened. But, we're going to say it happened because it suits our narrative to kind of make up this nonsense. Instead of adhering to journalistic objectivity, which would be nice, such outlets selectively construct reality. Again, doesn't matter what reality actually is, they want to create a reality in your mind by constantly giving you the same narratives, creating or exaggerating evidence that aligns with their ideological or commercial goals. And again, the BBC is extremely ideological. To give a quick example, and again, I'm not commenting on this, I'm just giving it as an example. The BBC basically chose, when they were doing Doctor Who, they chose someone who was from a sort of diverse ethnic background. They chose a character who was LGBTQ. They chose, quite, I would say he's quite a masculine character, but he does wear a dress and he does kiss men. And they also put like some kind of racist stories in there, and little hints that let's say, I don't know, the right-wing characters are kind of evil. And again, you have to go watch it if you want to. This really was not what Disney wanted. They didn't want a propaganda piece promoting BBC ideology. They basically wanted a good TV show that people could watch and enjoy. They don't really care about the ideological stuff. I really don't think they do. Some might say that they do, but ultimately, I think the BBC want to make money, and Disney want to make money. Disney was sponsoring the last season of Doctor Who. Anyway, that's just one example. You can see this kind of bias in nearly all of their content. They'll always be pushing various narratives. And again, this is just to kind of basically, it's to train people into a certain way of thinking that the elites like, right? This is government propaganda, basically. The process transforms reporting into narrative reinforcement. Again, the narrative here was that Orange Man bad, Donald Trump bad. At the moment, they're going after Nigel Farage really, really, really heavily. The narrative is that Nigel Farage will take away the NHS and everybody will be out on the streets and we'll all be poorer unless we vote in somebody else, preferably the strange green man who seems to have risen to prominence in the UK. But anyway, where emotional appeal. So again, Southport, they'll say, why did you join the riot? Why are you such a bad person? Instead of saying, why did the government let this happen? That's the emotional narrative. Wear a mask or Granny will die. That's another narrative they pushed heavily. Repetition. So it's on all the time, right? You can't escape from it. Every single time you turn it on, it's the same propaganda again and again and again. Selective sourcing, which will substitute for verification. So in other words, instead of reporting the truth, they only selectively support, what they want to report. The result is a feedback loop. Audience seek confirmation of their beliefs, while the media, driven by engagement metrics and ideological consistency. In the BBC's case, it's ideological because people really aren't that interested, continues to supply narratives that feel true even when they are empirically false. So anyway, long story short, they lie, confirmation bias, driven agenda setting, framing. What kind of setting are you putting on the movie? What kind of colours are you putting on the movie? What kind of music? Who are you trying to represent? Who's the victim in the story? Manufacturing consent. Narrative reinforcement. Constantly pushing the message. Feedback loop between media and audience. And there's a few more here. Anyway, guys, I think I've spoken enough. Clearly, I think what happened was absolutely disgusting. I don't think that we should have any interference in our elections, and I don't think our institutions like the BBC should be trying to push any kind of election interference in America or any other country. Their job isn't to push propaganda. Their job is to report the truth. Except they failed, and they've been failing for a long time. And unfortunately, I don't think they really understand what the issue is. But yeah, they're probably not going to learn either. If you wanted to solve a problem, hire people who are diverse. Hire people who didn't go to Oxford and Cambridge, right? That's a shocking thing to say, I'm sure. Actually go out and talk to the general public and see what they think about issues. Again, one of the things I will say is they have BBC Newsnight and they have BBC Question Time. Question Time is something which really is an exercise in controlling the people. They make people look stupid. They'll question people if they say something they disagree with. Even in the way they regard the audience, they'll just say something and they'll make the audience sound like they are completely and utterly stupid, Anyway, I did previously record this video and I got quite a bit angrier, to be fair. I had a rant about Gary Lineker. Gary Lineker is on £1.35 million a year. If you don't know who he is, he's basically an activist who gets paid to talk about football, and they go out after old ladies who are struggling to pay the bills to give them more money so they can give 1.3 million to people like Gary Lineker, who famously made the defense that he shouldn't have to pay tax because his Twitter account is doing social justice and social good, and therefore he shouldn't have to pay tax because he is such a light to the world and he is such a good man. Honestly, it makes me sort of disgusted because these people are so self-righteous. But anyway, I guess I will leave it there, guys. Should we abolish the BBC? No. All we should do is we should stop the BBC license fee, break it up, and basically say, look, we will keep the news service and the radio and stuff like this sort of going, maybe through government funding, but all the entertainment stuff will be sort of a separate company, basically. So split it in two. So you have BBC News and then you have BBC Entertainment, and the two are completely unrelated. And if BBC Entertainment want to actually make money, they have to produce content that people want instead of shoving out any old rubbish. That's my solution anyway. And you could say, well, how is this going to improve the bias at the BBC? Well, it will, because you'll, force the BBC to hire more diverse people who have different opinions rather than the sort of homogeneic worldview. Probably butchered that word. But anyway, guys, you get the idea. I hope you found this useful, and yeah, goodbye.